We hold these truths to be self evident that all men are created equal. This historic line from the United States Declaration of Independence has helped push forward movements such as the women's suffrage movement and the civil rights movement. However, this has not been particularly the case for our trans community. We still have a long way for trans rights to be fully protected. Trans rights should be protected. Following, I will briefly speak about trans terminology and issues within the community. According to the organization Gays and Lesbians Alliance Against Defamation, or better known as GLAD, transgender is a term to describe people whose gender identity differs from the sex they were assigned at birth. Gender identity is a person's interpersonal sense of being a man or a woman. For transgender people, the sex they were assigned at birth and their gender identity do not match. This is important to note because this is the root of the discrimination that they face. Their form of expression is often met with violence, ignorance, and prejudice. Transgender people, and transgender women of color especially, experience frightening levels of physical violence. This particularly is true among transgender people working in the sex work and other informal economies. Brutal murders of transgender women occur with alarming regularity, often with little to none help from local law enforcement. This was stated by the LGBTfunders.org. A big issue in the trans community are the economical hardships that often lead to homelessness. LGBTfunders.org also states transgender people bear the economic hardships and discriminations, including high rates of poverty, unemployment, discrimination against education, and homelessness. The following are examples of such discrimination. Trans rights should be protected because they are being murdered at alarming rates and are often subjected to violence because of their form of expression. According to the Human Rights Campaign, in 2017, advocates tracked at least 29 deaths of transgender people in the United States due to fatal violence. This was the most ever recorded. Some of these cases clearly show an anti-transgender bias. While the difference in cases might be different, there is a clear sense of violence. In 2018, we have already seen 26 transgender people fatally shot or killed by other violent means. The transgender community should be freely allowed to express themselves without fear of being murdered or met with some violent outburst. They are just trying to express themselves of who they truly are. The trans community is also at risk of homelessness because of their gender expression. Trans rights should be protected in this community because they are facing a homelessness epidemic based on discrimination. According to transequality.org, 1 in 5 transgender people in the United States have faced discrimination when seeking a home. More than 1 in 10 have been evicted from their homes because of their gender identity. Social services and homeless shelters help work with our transgender youth, but however, based off their gender identity, they are often misplaced or inappropriately housed because of their physical gender. The trans community is being discriminated by the system because of their gender expression, which puts them at risk to harm. This discrimination against trans community has become such a toxic event, it has seeped into our political administration, thus affecting trans rights. Trans rights should be protected lawfully by the government and enforced. The transgender community has faced discrimination based on ignorance and prejudice. Unfortunately, the Trump administration helps further perpetuate that into our system. An example of this is the military trans ban. Now, trans people are longer welcomed into the military, and this policy would get them kicked out of the military. This just shows you another way of the government's working against the trans community. They are being targeted based on the fact that they are trans. The Trump administration cited that it would be tremendous medical costs and disruption that the trans military would entail as cause for this ban. The Human Rights Campaign, though, has cited the well-being of transgender community as a big forefront in suicide rates. So, with bullying and violence and all these created toxic environment, our trans youth and adults have been more likely to commit suicide. According to the Human Rights Campaign, a published study by the American Academy of Pediatrics stated that alarming levels of attempted suicide among transgender youth, more than half transgender male teens who participated in the survey attempted suicide, while transgender women reported a 29.9% of attempted suicide in their life. Overall, a non-binary youth of 41.8% of respondents stated that they had attempted suicide at some point in their lives. These are alarming numbers and should be cause for concern. Our trans community should be welcomed. Instead, they are faced with harsh laws that ostracize them. Trans lives matter, and we should help protect them. Although some laws do exist to protect the trans community, it is still not enough. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, has cited that under the Fair Housing Act, FHA, that any discrimination against transgender renters or buyers is prohibited. However, this is not really the case. There is a lack of awareness that has contributed to this trans discrimination. People are still discriminating against the trans community, evicting them from their houses, and also refusing them to even rent and or buy any type of property. This has come from a place of prejudice, ignorance, or wherever the place may be. It is a bad for the trans community. We need more legal protection for the trans community on both a local and state level. Trans rights should be protected. The transgender community is still facing such violent discrimination, which is why we must stand united with them to make sure their rights are lawfully protected. Thank you for your time.